So Mark Fernandez. It's rule of no, it's not rule of two. Let me just check the notes here. It's the Reilly Roundtable. That's right. Mr. Fernandez, so nice to have you in here. I start everything off with a question.
Okay.
And the question for you is, aside from Star Wars, your favorite movie of all time?
Number one, I usually keep a top five. And it's interchangeable with those five.
I get it.
And that top five, I can pick out in casual conversation. Any one of those five could be, that's one of my favorite movies or my favorite movie.
Right.
So I have five.
Give me the five then. That I like. Okay.
So in no particular order.
Great.
Okay. Annie Hall.
Love it.
Okay. Silence of the Lambs.
So masterpiece.
Okay. The Matrix.
Matrix.
The Seven Samurai.
Another masterpiece.
In 2001.
God, those are good movies.
Yeah, so it's very hard for me to say, because at any, depending on how I wake up that morning, any one of those five could be the one. And then there's other ones that are teetering on that top five, Cries and Whispers, La Ventura.
Oh, man.
There's other great ones that I'm like, if one had to come up, because of something. So anyway, I know that that's not the right answer. It's not the...
It is the right answer, though. Yeah. There is no wrong or right answer, but that's the closest we'll get to a right answer, because immediately when I hear that list, Silence of the Lambs, one of the great thrillers of all time. Yeah. Some people classify it as horror. I call it a masterpiece of directing, acting, writing. Yeah. Just Jonathan Demme at his best. Yeah. And Annie Hall, for obvious things. Yeah, Annie Hall is one of the finest comedies of all time.
I mean, I think it is the greatest American comedy ever made. It's that, and then there's everything else. In my opinion,
it's the one that took the Oscar from New Hope, or Star Wars at the time before it was a New Hope.
Sadly, and I know we promised not to talk Star Wars, but sadly, I think Annie Hall deserved it.
Ooh, that's a podcast for another time, right there. Yeah. That's a good bit. I tend to agree with you. Seven Samurai is a masterpiece again. Yeah. So much cinema, so much film comes from that movie. So many directors have been inspired by that. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah. Come on,
Stanley Kubrick.
Stanley
Kubrick's my hero. If I had to pick a hero, if the question was who's your hero, and I'm going to sound a little bit like David Brent from The Office here. But it's probably John Lennon, Stanley Kubrick, and Jesus.
Those great Office reference in there. Yeah. You can't argue with 2001, which I revisited recently and forgot how wonderfully, beautifully shot it is. Just how it's a trip. That end is a trip. Matrix, I love that you included in there. And what was the last one? That's it. That was all of them.
Annie Hall, The Seven Samurai. The Matrix, Silence of the Lambs, and
2001.
2001. Yeah, those are the five.
Those are all good ones. And the thing that jumps out at me, which is just perfect for what I want to do on today's show, is that the differences of filmmakers, the different influences that come off of those movies, that you can see the influences from previous movies.
Great thought.
The fact that you have a varying degrees of greatness in director. From this list, you're a film guy.
Yeah.
And film influences and film making, writing, all of this. I want to talk about that. Welcome, everyone. It is episode 22 of the Reilly Roundtable. This is a show that talks about movies, it talks about life, it talks about movies and life, and everything in between. That's my tag. You know him from Up Top, you know him from Rule of Two, you know him from Collider. I finally got him in here, not to talk Star Wars, to talk everything else, because you get a lot of Star Wars with us. So this is a real treat for me. It's Mark Fernandez, CEO of Collider, joining me for the first time on the Reilly Roundtable. And how are you?
I'm good. Busy.
Man.
But good.
I roped you in on this pretty hard.
Yeah. Look,
I pulled you from a meeting, or after a meeting, I should say.
After a meeting, it's been a very busy day.
Yeah.
But look, I'm excited to forget about the now and think about some of those, like you said, some of those artistic influences that brought me here.
Yeah, because that's the thing. You know, everybody, you know, they know us from Rule of Two. And when that started, that was really fun because what we do is we really go into story a lot with Star Wars and what we love about the myths that Star Wars really kind of lends itself to. It's storytelling that we love, but then you guys don't hear us talk about anything else other than Star Wars because we're not recording.
Yeah, it's the rule of two.
Yeah, when we're standing in your office and we just get into a conversation about film. And then the history of it, getting to know you over my years here at Collider, we've had some writing projects together. We've obviously do Collider here, but it's the filmmaking. And it's like there's a certain language that we speak, I feel. And so I wanted to bring you on to talk about film.
Yeah, and like, look, you know, like I know we started the show in the open talking about the 5 favorite movies, but so it's not like an arbitrary passing fancy. If to give you a little insight, in my office, when you walk into my office, at both sides of the door is Silence of the Lambs and 2001. Mm-hmm. When you walk into the Collider office, you have Annie Hall on the poster there. When you walk inside my office, you have the Matrix poster and the Seven Samurai, right? Completing, you know, the Trinity or like the Five-inity.
The Five-inity, you know? the quadrant, no, the sequence.
I also have another poster behind my chair, and I know we're not supposed to talk about it, but I do have one more poster behind my chair.
Well, you have to explain it. It's perfect.
Yeah. So I have the poster of Revenge of the Sith,
which is your favorite Star Wars movie.
Which is my favorite Star Wars movie. Behind my chair. And then just recently I got 2 new posters, but smaller ones, more like collectible size posters, because they're not nowhere near the same level, but it was my favorite movie of this year and my favorite movie of last year.
Okay.
And I did get posters for them.
Which were they?
So my favorite movie of this year so far is Ready Player One.
Oh, that's right.
You know, I mean, look, it is like everybody can have their own opinion. I know there's probably better movies made, but for me, Ready Player One, I saw it 5 times in the theater. You know, I absolutely loved it.
But that's what's great about film. Yeah. It's subjective. So one person can think it's garbage, and you're like, no, that spoke to me on a certain level that I love it. And
I absolutely spoke to me on so many different levels.
You shouldn't have to and that's what we do here on the Reilly Roundtable. The fans are wonderful. They love the conversation. You know, it's not one of those things where, hey, you're a dork for liking Ready Player One. No, I watched it another time with my fiance, and it was fantastic.
It's a magical film.
Better. It was better on my 3rd viewing,
right?
Because we went to the press, then I went again for some of the stuff we were working on, and then watching it with her and seeing her reaction to it. It's one of her favorite movies of the year now because she got it. She just got all the references. So that was fun.
So my other movie that I have in there was my favorite movie of last year, which I thought was, to be honest with you, robbed of Academy Award consideration. And it was a movie that I likened it to Schindler's List in how it made me feel. You know? And also how it educated me on the plight of the subject matter. And that movie was Detroit. You know?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. I remember you talking.
I loved Detroit. I thought it was an excellent film, and I have a very small collector's poster that was like only like 150 of them were made, and it's a really interesting collage that shows John Boyega in the middle with like a bunch of stuff happening around him, and that was my favorite movie of 2017. So I have that poster up, but that's it for now for posters in the office. For me, I mean, there's a million posters all over the office. You know, your Raiders posters, ET posters. Like these are yours, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's what's so funny is like if you go further back in the studio, you see E.T. and Jaws, which are my top 2 favorite movies all time.
Yeah,
they change number 1 and number 2 constantly.
Raiders and E.T.?
No, E.T. and Jaws.
Oh, I'm sorry, E.T. and Jaws.
Yeah, E.T. and Jaws.
The Raiders poster is also yours, right?
Raiders poster is also mine. Yeah, and that I would say Raiders is in my top 10. So
when I was a kid, before I went to film school at NYU, and people would ask me, "What's your favorite movie?" I would usually say Raiders.
Yeah.
Okay. Like Raiders. Like until I started learning a little bit more, I think it was when I first was introduced to Stanley Kubrick. via the movie that I was introduced to Stanley Kubrick by was Full Metal Jacket. It was the first time I saw Full Metal Jacket.
I think that's my favorite Kubrick.
Yeah,
to be honest with you.
When I saw that, because I was fairly young still, I was like teenager. So Spielberg for me was like, oh, it's all about Spielberg and Star Wars. Like I used to read those Jack Ryan books, Clear and Present
Tom
Danger
Clancy,
and Patriot Games and stuff like that. So it was, it was Star Wars, it was Raiders, it was all the Lucas stuff, the Spielberg stuff, and then like my Tom Clancy things. Like those are my main things. And then I was so obsessed with movie making that like my buddies and I were like, oh, we should try to make movies and have fun doing that. And so I got a video toaster for my Amiga, and we started like messing around with editing, and I got my first gig. And I know we want to talk biology here or biography here, but I got my first gig like doing like teleprompter stuff. And through this stuff, somebody turned me on to Full Metal Jacket.
Oh,
They're
wow.
like, oh, you should check out Full Metal Jacket if you like. Because, I was already starting to say, here's actually a really interesting thing. I think I said this in our top 10, but after I saw Hook when I was a kid by Spielberg, I walked out of the theater and I was like, I'm going to go try to become a filmmaker.
Wow.
Yeah. Which one was it for you?
Oh, God. That is a good question.
For me, it was Hook. It was just a random one. But Hook, I vividly remember walking out of Hook and saying, you know what? That's what I want to do.
It's around that time. I remember having a very similar reaction. When I walked out of Hook, I felt alive.
Yeah.
There was something about Hook, and we're very similar in growing up and age even, and these movies are all hitting me at the same time.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember. I don't know if there's a certain movie. There are certain movies that really stick with me for like influencing me. Jaws, Halloween, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Empire Strikes Back, The Godfather, Goodfellas. You see a trend here, I think.
Yeah.
You go from like blockbuster to mafia.
Yeah, yeah.
But Annie Hall is another one, which I identify with so much just because I started getting into film, especially writing, because there was a movie. I think really when I started to become conscious of the idea of coming up with stories on my own, it was the twist in Empire Strikes Back that did it. It was like, how can somebody fool me like that? Like I didn't understand like how you could, because when it happened, Empire comes out 1980, right? And so I'm very, very young, and I was fooled, and I'm like, no, I don't believe that. Darth Vader's lying. He can't be Luke's father. And it was years later when I'm going back and revisiting that, I started to break down A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, trying to figure out if there was any clues. And I couldn't really see any. And then I started to see, wait a minute, the Force is strong with this one. And no, we're not supposed to talk about Star Wars. It's rule of two. But, to your point, that's where I started to really notice like writing and like being able to subvert expectations. And how is that done? I watched Annie Hall over and over and over again to try to figure out why is his dialogue so great.
Yeah. I mean, Woody Allen is just on another level, especially in those days.
But you know what is what
Manhattan? You've seen Manhattan, of course.
Oh, Manhattan. I've seen every Woody Allen there is because he did it for me. But it was When Harry Met Sally, that movie where I really started to notice dialogue a lot, and so I would watch When Harry Met Sally and Annie Hall, which I feel are very kind of similar.
Yeah.
Not, they have a Woody Allen feel to it, even though it's a Rob Reiner picture. But When Harry Met Sally was dialogue for me. And then years later, Sideways. Have you ever seen Sideways?
Yeah, the movie with like about the wine drinking.
Yeah, the wine drinking. It's Thomas Hayden Church. It's Victoria Madsen.
Yeah,
Veronica Madsen.
But you're missing the main guy, like the guy who plays all the. biopics.
Miles. I don't know why I can't remember his name right now.
It's the guy who's in every biopic.
I am completely blanking.
He's in the Howard Stern biopic. He's in the Straight Outta Compton.
If I was on the Schmodown right now, I would lose this question. It's Paul Giamatti.
Paul Giamatti.
The fuck is wrong with me today? This is awful.
It's happened. You know, actually, it's an interesting thing. That's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's called collective amnesia.
Oh,
it's actually
okay.
like something that's been tested in labs, and through great degree of success, if one person instigates the conversation with like an honest, sincere, but like a lack of memory on something, it greatly influences the person that they're dealing with, and you can literally create collective amnesia. Because like Paul Giamatti is like one of the most famous people, like
Yeah, and name gone.
And like for me, I just have bad short-term memory sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I do too.
Yeah. So anyway, So when I got into Kubrick, is when it opened up a whole new world for me, and I was like, oh man, like there's these filmmakers out there that are not the guys that are giving us the blockbuster, because we grew up in the age of blockbuster.
Yes.
Like we grew up in the golden age of Hollywood blockbusters.
It really was. Spielberg leading the charge.
Yeah, and so it's from like 77, where supposedly the blockbuster, I'm sorry, 75
for Jaws.
Right, where the blockbuster was invented, and then the Star Wars, and then the Indiana Jones, and the Back to the Futures, and the Ghostbusters, and all that shit. The first screenplay I ever wrote, and I remember I got a detention for it. It's actually kind of a cool story, as a kid.
I would love to hear it. Yeah.
So the first screenplay I ever wrote, I came to this country from Venezuela.
Right.
So when I was a little kid, I was in like ESOL, right? So it's like English. You learn how to speak English, right?
Okay.
Because like my native tongue is Spanish.
Right.
So I'm learning how to speak English, and I saw that Ghostbusters movie, the first one. And I was like, wow, this is fucking. I mean, that first.
It is a masterpiece of a comedy.
Yeah, and I was so young.
Mixing horror, comedy, it's like great acting, directing's phenomenal.
So what I did was I wanted to see the sequel so bad, or like I wanted more of that world so badly,
right?
That I wrote my own sequel.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
To Ghostbusters 1, right?
Yeah,
and actually. The story turned out to be quite similar to the actual Ghostbusters 2, to my credit as a kid. But
wow.
But when I was a kid, and this thing was like 50, 60 pages long in poor, broken English, because I was just learning the language. Right. And like I had cursing in it, because Ghostbusters had cursing in it. So I had cursing in my sequel. But you got to remember, I'm like 8. I'm like 10, 11 years old, at this point. And my teacher found it.
Oh no!
And my teacher looked at it, and this is after like I would go home and like read it to my parents, and like they would be so proud of me that I was like writing and stuff like that. So my teacher takes this fucking thing and starts scratching out all the bad words in red ink.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big teacher move.
Yeah,
that's a teacher move right there.
Circles it in red ink, scratches it all over the place.
Oh wow!
And gives me detention. Okay, and sends me, because there's cursing in it. There's the F-bomb, and there's the cursing in it, right?
Right.
And then they sent me to the principal's office, right? Like that was the move when we were growing up.
Yeah.
If they really wanted to discipline you, they would send you to the principal's office.
Yeah, which put strike terror in the hearts of kids everywhere.
And I'll never forget this. My principal, Mr. Greenbaum, at Kendall Lakes Elementary in Miami, Florida, looks at it and says, where did you learn these bad words or whatever? And I'm like, like I heard him watching this movie. He's like, it's not appropriate to like say that in class or whatever. And I was like, yeah. And but he actually tells me, he's like, you know what, this is actually pretty good.
That's really good.
Are
you serious?
Like, he was like, you should be. I actually want to encourage this. So it's like it was the first.
That's a
time.
good teacher right there. That's a good principal.
Yeah, it was the first time where it was like he looked beyond the cussing and like the pettiness that the teacher had with it, and was like, you know what, this is the kind of thing that you should be empowered with. So he actually recommended me to go to South Miami Middle School, which is, back in those days called a magnet school for the arts.
Right.
So he was actually very instrumental in sending me to magnet school.
God, I love hearing that story.
Yeah, and Mr. Greenbaum was, rest in peace. He passed away quite some years ago.
Yeah.
Like, there's a great lesson there, I think, for educators, right? Like, here's a kid doing something that's inappropriate to a degree,
right?
But don't suffocate when people give you a sign of what they want. You know, it's
Right.
like. Anyway, it was just a very interesting story.
That's a great story, and I love. There's a bunch of things I love there. It reminds me of my mom and my sister are teachers, and they're very much into the nurturing and like especially my sister right now, who currently teaches 5th grade, and she can see creativity like certain kids. She's like, that's a writer, you know, that's that, and she's all about nurturing, and I love hearing that because that's so important. It's like he's looking at this script going, well, you're not running around cursing, you know, in school. You're putting it here.
Right.
It's by design.
Yeah.
It's because you're writing in a genre at that point. At that point, I love that story.
Yeah, and like I don't know what happened, but I've always thought that Mr. Greenbaum somehow disciplined that teacher. Like I actually think he disciplined her.
Yeah.
Like I don't know for sure, but I have that kind of fantasy in my head that, you know, because I didn't really get in trouble for it. He didn't like, because typically like you escalate with the principal by calling your parents.
Right.
You know, so like your parents is the next move.
Yeah.
And he never called my parents or anything.
Wow.
Like that. Yeah.
That's great. Then you're like Ralphie in Christmas Story, and you get the soap in your mouth.
Right. But yeah, you know, anyway, so Kubrick was the one that opened me up and said, hey, there's filmmakers out there that can entertain you while really focusing on the craft and the art form of cinema that are purposely evolving the medium forward, that are experimenting with new things, that are master crafters in suspension of disbelief, right?
That's Kubrick.
So then I got into Terrence Malick with this movie called Badlands, and then I became obsessed with Badlands. Sissy Spacek and Charlie Sheen. No, I'm sorry, Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen. It's funny because there's actually a movie that his son did that's kind of a ripoff of Badlands called Wisdom back in those days.
Oh yeah, I remember that movie. Holy shit! Yeah.
I
haven't
actually
seen it in years.
Badlands is this weird film because it's one of the most copied films of all time. You know, and I actually wrote my senior thesis at NYU about Badlands. I was fascinated with this movie, Badlands. So Badlands is also basically so True Romance is basically a ripoff of Badlands. You know,
interesting.
And like, you know, ripoff is a harsh word because Quentin Tarantino is a beautiful artist, but definitely a very much inspired by it, down to the music, right?
Yeah.
So the music in True Romance is the same. That dun 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 dun
Hans Zimmer.
dun dun dun. That comes from Badlands.
Wow. I don't think I've ever seen Badlands. I got to see it.
It's epic. Terrence Malick.
Yeah,
It's
Terrence
epic.
Malick. Well, if you're telling me, you know, True Romance and Tarantino writes it, Tony Scott directs it, that's like an influence.
Oh,
That's-
yeah. It's the same story, right?
Tarantino is probably, that's his homage, you know, to Badlands.
It's Martin Sheen in the Christian Slater role and Sissy Spacek in the
Patricia
in the
Arquette.
Patricia Arquette role. Yeah,
Oh, that's great.
you should check it out. I'm surprised you haven't seen Badlands.
There are some film holes in, you know.
So Terrence Malick also did another film that at the time was widely regarded as, like, to this day, I think, as one of the greatest achievements in the history of cinematography, which is this movie called Days of Heaven.
Heard of it? Haven't seen it, though.
With Richard Gere. Older, I think that came out before Badlands. I want to say it came out before Badlands. It was the one right before Badlands.
Okay.
And the movie's a little boring. You know, it's not like Badlands, which is just an incredible narrative. But man, the cinematography in Days of Heaven is on another planet.
I love this. There's so many things that are sticking out to me when you're talking. You know, you talk about cinematography with Badlands. You talk about, you know, writing with even writing with Quentin Tarantino and comparing it to True Romance, homages, and this film influence stuff is awesome to hear. So you were at NYU, and what was your main major there?
Film and cinematography.
Film and cinematography.
Yeah.
Okay, so like directing, or was it more?
So at NYU, you back then anyway, at the Tisch School of the Arts, you took this major, film and cinematography, and basically they just taught you how to make a movie.
Yeah.
You know, every year you had a class called Sight and Sound, and Sight and Sound was Sight and Sound 1 through 4, and that's the class you got to make a movie. And every year you got to make a little bit longer movie.
Okay, so you start with a short, and then you go maybe a little bit longer.
I think you start off with 5 minutes, and I think in your senior, at least back in those days, it was 5 minutes was the first one, and in your senior year, I think you went up to 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then at the end of the year, you would, or at the end of the semester, you would show it, to the class, and it was a lot of fun, and shooting 16 millimeter.
Oh wow.
With like R reflexes and Bolexes and all that kind of stuff, and editing on the Steenbeck.
Oh wow.
Did you ever edit on the Steenbeck?
No, I was God. I wanted to say we had a near miss because we're the same age.
We're the same age, yeah.
I got into Tisch.
Oh, okay, nice.
And decided to stay and go to USC.
Oh, see, it's funny. I actually applied to USC and I got rejected.
Yeah. See, I didn't go into the cinema school. So I went into the theater program, but I became a cinema minor, which I didn't, then you can start taking classes. You can, I took a screenwriting class. I shadowed a lot of directors and a lot of cinematographers. A fraternity brother of mine is a working cinematographer now.
Oh, nice.
So that was kind of my angle because at one point.
USC was like, I applied there. I applied to UCLA.
Yeah, I got rejected from UCLA.
Yeah, so I got rejected from USC, rejected from UCLA. I got accepted at Cal Arts.
Okay.
And I actually went up there to visit the school. I didn't like it. It was too isolated. It was it's like in the desert somewhere up north.
Cal Arts. Where is that? That's is it like Davis? It's like up really north.
It's right by the Six Flags up there.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, Ventura kind of area.
It's far. It's far. It's like an hour and a half away from here.
Yeah,
It's like up north somewhere.
Even past Ventura. I don't even know what that area is called.
So I got accepted there. Then I got accepted to NYU. I also applied to the University of Iowa.
Oh.
Because the University of Iowa was the only school that had a doctorate in film at the time.
Okay.
And I didn't get accepted. I mean, I was applying to undergrad anyway, but I didn't even get accepted to that. So NYU, it was like, oh fuck, NYU.
There it is.
It's like
that's a big one.
Maybe that's where I'm meant to go. So I moved to New York in 1995. I did one semester at UM.
Okay.
Because when you're young and you're not sure if you want to leave town. So I did one semester at the University of Miami, and all I did was party.
Yeah.
The entire time.
Well, that's college for you.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I didn't do anything. It was just all party.
Yeah.
And then things got a little hectic with some people around me. Like Miami's a very rough town when it comes to party things. And
yeah, I've heard.
I got the hell out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to NYU.
And then went to NYU.
Yeah, and it was great.
So what was so your film and cinematography?
Yeah.
When did you start kind of playing around with maybe some writing? Because the one thing I noticed about you is your attention to detail on writing, on mythology, storytelling. That's where I like to think that you and I had kind of an unspoken thing going when we did work on a script here.
Yeah, which is a cool project. We never did it.
Yeah, we never did it, but the process, the writing was really fun, and I could see we're speaking the same language.
Yeah. Maybe we should tell the people that a little bit. So Reilly and I did a short for Awesome-tacular.
Yep.
That Jeremy Johns was going to star in with Makuga. It was Makuga.
We wrote it for Johns and Makoogs.
Yeah, it was called The Frogman. It was a pretty interesting story. I won't give too many of the details because maybe one day we'll actually do it.
I know. I wanted to say because it's our little homage, not homage, but it's definitely a horror.
It was a straight up horror.
Yep. Yeah. It was a straight up horror. I think the concept is really good.
Yeah.
The concept is great. I mean,
the script was good. You know what it was? The reason we didn't do it is that it was towards the end of Awesome-tacular.
Yeah.
And it was expensive.
Yeah, it was too expensive. We were under the wire to finish some stuff, but again, the process was great. There's some. If you think Silence of the Lambs is one of your movies, I mean, there's some influences there. There's some Seven influences there, which is one of my favorite. I don't know, what would you call Seven a horror movie? I call it a thriller.
So, for me, I consider Seven and I consider Silence of the Lambs both horror movies.
Both horror movies. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people do. I mean,
that's why when we did our top 10, I was shocked not to have Silence of the Lambs in there because to me, Silence of the Lambs is I think it's clearly horror. It's a movie about a slasher and a cop trying to catch him, right? I mean, that's essentially
serial killer. Yeah,
that's essentially what Halloween's about.
Yeah. I guess it's so funny when you think about the horror genre, because you look at Silence of the Lambs, it's one of those movies that is up there with like only two other to do the sweep, the five wins.
Yes.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is also teetering on my top 5. So that's another one. Milos Forman. Teetering up there. Yes.
Yeah, best actor, best actress, best director, writing, picture.
Yes. And do you know what the other one is?
Yeah, It Happened One Night.
It Happened One Night. Yeah,
and
Frank
that's
Capra.
Frank Capra.
Yeah.
Why can't I remember his name? It's Gone with the Wind. It's
Clark Gable.
Clark Gable.
Yeah. I forgot who the lady was.
Oh, Schmodown. I studied this one. I can't remember. F it. Who cares?
Yeah. But so to be honest with you, I've never seen It Happen One Night.
I watched it in speaking of film school at USC. There's a great class, and I think Drew Casper still teaches it. He's and it's like your beginner. Go in, let's watch it. Let's watch movies and then just dissect the fuck out of them.
Yeah.
And he would go deep, and we watched it then because it's like this is the movie that started the whole best actor, best actress, best director, best writer, and best picture.
Yeah, and for me, NYU was fascinating when I look back at it for two reasons. Obviously there's all the things about living in New York and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, from a more of like how it influenced my life, I really look at two major things. Mm-hmm. Number one, in Sight and Sound, something happened to me that made me switch my whole mentality towards being a creative person. Mm-hmm. Or let me rephrase that: attempting to be a creative person. Right? Because it's not always a success,
No,
but
it's tough.
But the attempt itself is brave sometimes.
Oh, always.
Yeah.
I think it always is. If you put yourself out there and say, I want to write, act, direct, whatever, you're going to have to put yourself out there and hang yourself to dry. Not only for rejection, but also bearing your soul. Because why else are you going to tell a story? You're going to have to show what's in here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So in NYU, there was a library called the Bobst Library. Okay. And it was this huge building off of Washington Square Park. And back in those days, there was a very, very crude internet. It's the world in the late '90s was very different than the world today.
Oh okay? God, you're again the same age. I remember there's email. What's that?
Yeah.
Going into the computer bank and sending something and being like, I don't know what I did.
Yeah, and I'm an early adopter, and so I was already hip with the internet, had BBSs, all that kind of stuff. But when I was at NYU. NYU had an incredible film library. Incredible film library, and this is a massive building in the middle of Washington Square Park, where there's places that you can go and get lost in, right?
Yeah.
But they had this little thing where you can go to a little booth, almost like in Silence of the Lambs, the microfilm thing.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have my version at SC.
Right. So you can some films they would have an actual film. Mm-hmm. You would put them up and watch them, and some films they would have on VHS, and you would watch them in the same kind of setup.
Yeah.
And man, I would go into Bobst or Bobst. I don't know. People call it different things. I always call it the Bobst Library, but I think it's Bobst is the actual thing. I think Perry, who also went to NYU, corrected me on it.
Oh.
But anyway. By the bathroom, there was these huge, long, talk about Kubrick 0 point perspective. There was these huge, long hallways, and I would go to some random section by the bathrooms, and I would smoke a bean. Okay, I would smoke a bean, and then I would go to the to the film cube, and I would rent out my movies.
Yep.
And I would alternate directors. Okay, so one day I would do, Kubrick doesn't have that many movies, but I did do a few Kubricks. Mm-hmm. But really, the ones that I really focused in on was Ingmar Bergman.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Akira Kurosawa and Alfred Hitchcock. Because they have
the three greats.
Those three directors have so much work.
Oh yeah.
That I would literally go there, smoke my bean. One day I would watch a Kubrick. Kubrick had very few movies, so Kubrick I went through pretty quick. It was the equivalent. You know what? It was the equivalent of binge watching.
Yeah. Oh my
Back in
God.
those
Yeah.
days.
This is the early days.
This is the early binge, right?
Yeah.
Where you pick a director and you're like, you know what? I'm going to watch all his fucking movies.
Yeah.
And Ingmar Bergman, Swedish filmmaker, who's the real Woody Allen. Like, there's no Woody Allen without Ingmar Bergman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, Ingmar Bergman, Woody Allen basically just copies Ingmar Bergman films. Like,
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like Tarantino gets a lot of slack for copying a lot of stuff and mismatching things, and which is fair. Like Pablo Picasso said, all art is imitation.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
is.
So you got Bergman,
Kurosawa.
which is just like,
I did that so we have Doheny Library.
yeah.
And it reminds me of what you're saying. It's just these beautiful, you walk in, beautiful, but there's a film library down in the basement
Right.
that you go to, and you have your booths and whatnot. I went and did Hidden Fortress. That's the one that I remember.
Yeah.
Because it was like somebody brought, I know why, because we watched Seven Samurai
Right.
in Drew Casper's thing. And then I fucking loved that movie, and I started to go, what else is there?
Yeah, so you know what? To be honest with you, with all this like academic film stuff that I have, my first Kurosawa movie was also the Hidden Fortress.
Hidden Fortress, yeah.
And it was mainly because I had always read the interviews with George Lucas,
Same. Yep.
where George Lucas said that the Hidden Fortress was his first inspiration for Star Wars, and very specifically his inspiration for R2-D2, C-3PO, and Princess Leia and Han Solo.
Because, I was going to say the two peasants are R2 and 3PO.
Yes, yes.
So that's that, yeah.
And you can
this is great.
totally see it. And it opens like Star Wars.
Yep.
I mean, it's, another cinematic technique that he takes directly from Akira Kurosawa are the concentric wipes. The side wipes.
Yep, the side wipes, the ups, the downs,
ups, all that stuff that is like, oh, that's Star Wars.
Yep,
No, it's Kurosawa.
Yeah.
But you know what? This is why I love George Lucas, and like I know we're not supposed to talk about Lucas, but this is why I fucking love George Lucas.
No, we now have to talk about it because Star Wars aside, George Lucas.
Yeah.
It's George Lucas.
It's George Lucas. So George Lucas was completely stylistically inspired. Because people say, "Oh, it's based on the Heroes of a Thousand Faces." Yes, you're right. That
part of it.
The plot is that. But that's just a story on a piece of paper, right? Like that's a story that's been told by humanity 1,000 times.
Right.
That's just a way to relate to something.
It's great for writing.
Where Lucas really got his inspiration from as a storyteller was from Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he does these like medieval, like not medieval, these feudal period pieces, but you don't know what period it's in. You have no idea. It feels. Oh man, like
it kind of feels timeless almost.
Dude, you know what it feels like? I just made this connection right now for the first time ever
I love it.
on the Reilly Roundtable. You know what it feels like?
Perfect.
Kurosawa films.
What?
It feels like they happened a really long, long time ago in a galaxy
far, far away. Yeah.
Like
That's
they
great.
have that vibe. You know, like you don't know where the hell this all happens. Like these samurais. Like, is this supposed to be a period piece or not? Like it never
Right.
tells you.
No.
It's just a myth.
That's fantastic.
It's just a
I can see
fantasy.
that. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the Seventh Samurai has that too, right? But yeah, so the first one I saw was The Hidden Fortress, which is an incredible movie. And I was like, man, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah.
You know, and then it's just a rabbit hole of his almost 50 plus movies that he has.
Yeah, I couldn't even begin. I mean, I know the two obviously that really spoke to me: Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai. But you bring up some other greats like Hitchcock. Obviously, I had a big Hitchcock phase again at USC because when I started, Jaws is really the movie for me that speaks about filmmaking, from the writing, the directing, the casting, the music, the editing. That movie shouldn't have fucking worked at all. And the thing that's interesting about Jaws, as I kept going back to it, I started to really see, wait a minute, that like this movie was doomed. But why did it work? Okay, shark doesn't work. I'm going to employ Hitchcock. You're not going to see anything.
Yeah.
You're going to have the girl thrashing about in the beginning.
Yeah.
Guys on the beach pulling her with a rope. She breaks her ribs because they're pulling her.
Does she really?
Yeah, that's a big story. Was shark didn't work? Okay, Spielberg, tie her up. Let's simulate the shark. And so they pulled so hard, one of those screams was her rib breaking.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a great.
Fascinating.
You know why? Because I start getting into the Jaws log is a great book for filmmakers that a lot of filmmakers, Eli Roth is a huge one, carried around in his back pocket, because the writer started to basically write the journal. Shark didn't work today. Okay, let's go to the casting. I'm going to go after all these different people before getting
So
Robert
the guy
Shaw.
who wrote this book was the screenwriter?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember his name. Jaws log. I got the internet. It's one of the best books on, I would say.
It's not Peter Blanchie or whatever.
No, Peter Benchley.
Benchley
yeah,
wrote the
Benchley
book, right?
wrote the book. Carl Gottlieb.
Okay.
Again, I'm forgetting everything.
yeah, it's all good.
Carl Gottlieb was brought in to basically rewrite the script as they were filming. So he would have days where need pages. So he would write some pages. But then you think the casting, and then you have Verna Fields who did. No, Verna Fields was. Is that Scorsese? I'm trying to remember. She goes in. Yeah, Verna Fields. I was right. Hey, I got a Schmoedown question right. She edited Jaws. So the dailies would come in, and she would sit over dinner with Spielberg, Gottlieb, sometimes the actors, and they would cut that movie because she's not working with the shark. So she's got to do something, right? So it was Jaws that really got me into how a script can work, and then what happens when you film it and your star sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And so what do you do? And it's that kind of
the problem-solving element.
Exactly, the problem-solving element that is so needed on a film set because you never know what's going to happen. But then how do you get that movie to work as well as it does to then become the very first blockbuster that starts the summer, that now everybody refers to.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved
and launched
about.
one of the most historic cinematic careers in history, right? Like, you definitely can't tell the story of Hollywood without that dude.
No, Steven Spielberg is my guy. He's my favorite director of all time.
Yeah.
Because then if Jaws, and I said this in our top 10 Spielberg, if Jaws doesn't work, we do not have Close Encounters. We don't have E.T. We don't have Raiders. We don't have Indiana Jones, obviously. We don't have Schindler's List. We don't have any of these movies.
Yeah.
That is what I feel. It's because...
The only one that I'm not sure I'd put on there is Raiders.
Right? You think he would have done it?
I think Lucas was on a mission.
Yeah. Well, I love the story about that. Do you know the story about, I believe it was after Close Encounters,
Yeah.
after Star Wars, they came out the same year, they go vacation in Hawaii.
Because they knew each other, so...
Yeah, they knew each other already.
So back in the day, maybe for some of the film buffs out there, this is all like common knowledge, but there was a group of filmmakers back in those days known as the American Zoetrope.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
you know.
So a zoetrope is this interesting device that was one of the first moving pictures that that anybody could sort of watch, and it was like this, like almost looked like a carousel, and you could spin it, and you can look through a little lens, and you can see the flickering images of the horse running, and it was the zoetrope, and it was this amazing thing where you can actually see animation. It was like predates projectors and movies and stuff like that. And like these guys, so it's Brian De Palma, Steven Spielberg. Even though Steven Spielberg came into it later,
He did, yeah.
It's Brian De Palma, George Lucas,
Francis Ford.
Francis Ford Coppola. Those are the
Did you say
three,
De Palma? Yeah,
and Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese, that was the one.
So those are the four. Those are the core four.
Was,
and then
Milius?
Spielberg was in the mix.
Yeah, Spielberg was in the mix. I wanted to say that Milius was in there. John Milius, who did Red Dawn and Conan the Barbarian.
Maybe.
He, I know, did a little punch-up on the USS Indianapolis speech in Jaws that Robert Shaw does. And then I think he also helped with The Crawl with George Lucas.
Yeah. So these guys were like a kind of like an art team, they were a collective, and like they had this idea that they were going to make independent films and that nobody was going to tell them what to do. And one of the first films under the American Zoetrope banner was a little movie directed by one of the American Zoetrope guys by the name of George Lucas called THX 1138.
There it is, yep.
And it's funny because if you look at those original American Zoetrope guys, right? The only one that truly became an independent filmmaker and still to this day follows the line of American Zoetrope, even though he doesn't own any part of the company anymore. I think he sold, because he was an owner of American Zoetrope as well.
Right.
Is George Lucas.
Yeah, I was going to say.
He's still the only one.
Yeah.
He's the only survivor.
And this is why I respect you as a filmmaker, as somebody that when you say, I like this movie, I listen because I value your opinion, is that you've said many times the prequels are your favorite. And we're not going to be able to get away from Star Wars. I'm sorry. It's just going to happen.
I'm not sure if the prequels are my favorite. Let me make that very clear.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you appreciate the prequels because of that independent vision that he has, that Lucas has.
Yes. Revenge of the Sith is my favorite one out of all of them because it's the one that's the most watchable for me now. For me, it's easier to watch Revenge of the Sith and have fun with it more than it is all the other 6. You know, and I'm going to talk just about like the original saga, right? Like, the actual Lucas one.
Because Lucas is not on the sequels. That's Rule of Two. You can catch it every Wednesday on Collider Podcast One.
But yeah, I mean, when Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, all these guys, Francis Ford Coppola held out the longest. You know, because his whole story, and I highly recommend this, one of the best documentaries ever made about cinema, called The Heart of Darkness.
Oh, God, yes. The Making of Apocalypse Now.
The Making of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
You see the American Zoetrope coming out of this man's blood. I mean, like, you know, like that vision for that film school of independent thinking and independent distribution and all these elements, you see it in that film. But even that film, he didn't like own the IP. It's just like, you know, he's working within the studio system. Where George Lucas, even though THX was completely independent, I believe somebody's going to gotcha me on that one.
For lack of a better term, no gotcha. It was his vision.
It was absolutely his vision.
Whether a studio was involved, that thing was uncompromising.
Right.
Like what ended up on screen.
Where Star Wars was completely him. Like he told, you know, Paramount, you're just, or 20th Century Fox, you're just distributing it. Like, I'm making it.
Right.
You're going to distribute it.
And that was Laddie, Alan Ladd Jr.
Who from
Fox, who was the one that believed in Lucas, that like said, okay,
I'm going to make the deal.
And we're going to make the deal because
I believe American Graffiti's in the studio system.
American Graffiti, yes, is in the studio system. American Graffiti got him Star Wars. Like, okay, you can do a movie. What is this? The Star Wars? You know, from the Journal of Wills? What the hell is this?
Right.
You know what I mean? And it was Laddie that, you know, that's what they called him, is the one that believed in it enough that gave him, I believe, $10 million to make Star Wars. Not all in. That's his budget. You know, I think he made 500,000. I don't know.
Right.
There's going to be better people that know this. I mean, this is the conversation that we're just finding right now.
Yeah, but so look, all this stuff at NYU, like when I think about it, anyway. So my other thing, which I think is important, is that as I was watching all these filmmakers, I noticed that every movie that was better and better and better and better, typically the reason they were better is because they were trying something new, succeeding to it, and then it's almost like if you look at film like an alphabet, you know, and like movies have different letters like ape. You know, like this is, like the A, the P, and the E, when you put them together, give you the word ape.
Right.
But A, P, and E, like amongst themselves, it's just like, it's a technique, you know? And people constantly adding new letters, to the alphabet so you can create new words. And I noticed that this was a common thing between every movie that I loved. So in my senior year of Sight and Sound, I came across this group of, filmmakers like Lars von Trier. Do you remember this guy?
Lars? Oh, yeah.
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 And the whole dogma thing, So like I was pretty into that stuff. And for my senior thesis, I actually, or my senior film in Sight and Sound, called Der Schweigen, The Silence in German. It was absolutely obnoxious artsy-fartsy shit.
Okay.
It was about like a couple that had just like realized they were having dinner and they just realized that it's over. You know, so it was just like they're eating and they're just not talking. You know how like sometimes when you eat with somebody you just don't talk.
Yeah.
And it's just like that silence. And then it's just flashbacks of them fighting and getting to this point, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it actually wasn't terrible.
Yeah, I like it.
But I got them to let me, because, you know, they only give you X number of canisters of 60 millimeter film, right? So you only get like 10 canisters.
Okay.
And you don't get any more.
Yeah, because that shit is expensive.
It's super expensive.
Yeah.
So it makes it very, very difficult to really tell the story you wanted to tell. So I had to plead with the dean of the school and all these things. They let me shoot it with a DCR VX1000, and I had to like ask for it. Like I had to literally submit an application to it, and ultimately they let me do it. So I was one of the first people at NYU in the history of NYU to shoot on digital and then convert my digital over to film, to a negative. And I did cut on the steam back.
That's great.
And I did all the other parts, but they let me shoot on digital and then convert it to my negative.
Wow.
So I didn't have to like waste my canisters.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's digital on film.
Oh, yeah.
But I was able to shoot hours and like...
We looked into that. We wanted to do, when I made my horror movie, we wanted to take, you know, we were shooting on digital because that's all we could afford, but we looked into putting it on film.
Yeah.
Just like that. But even that was like, is how much? Oh, gotcha. No, we'll stick with digital. So we're good. Thank you. More money?
Yeah,
Thank
film
you.
is done, huh?
I was just going to say, I think that, yes, I think that Tarantino still does it. You know, I think he's shooting Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I thought The Hateful Eight was great.
The Hateful Eight. I mean, you can like Tarantino movies one over the other, one more so than the others. They're all good.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. Your eye is going to be drawn to whatever movie. Hateful Eight, some people don't like it that much. I happen to love it.
I loved it.
I personally, I like Django Unchained better, but again,
right.
That's
not me. I'm more on Hateful Eight.
Yeah, and that's just, again, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Film and the influences, and you bring up all the greats and some of these great movies. I wanted to go back to the Zoetrope.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being in a room with those guys?
Yeah.
Because around that time...
There's a great documentary about it.
Yeah, and they touch on it in the Spielberg documentary that you can see on HBO right now. So I highly recommend that because you see them in the room together. You see like Marty Scorsese just laughing, and then Francis Ford Coppola and Spielberg and Lucas. But
Brian De Palma.
We can't, Scarface, my God. You, like... With those guys, Carlito's Way. What else did Palma do?
The Untouchables.
Carrie, Untouchables.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy.
Untouchables is a great film.
I love The Untouchables. Speaking about Ennio Morricone, the composer that on Hateful Eight did the fantastic score on The Untouchables.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. But just to be in that room, if you were in that room with those guys, maybe not knowing what you know now, but this is a hypothetical, who would you cozy up to? Who would you want to talk to? Pick their brain.
So you're saying as a thought experiment, if I was their peer, or if I knew that these kids were masters already?
You can answer it any way. Both, one or the other.
Out of that crew, the person that I think I have the most in common with, right? Who I would want to build like rapport with and friendship. And friendships are usually about collaboration and working together and stuff like that. I mean, definitely would be Lucas, you know. And I've actually gotten to meet Lucas a few times.
Yeah, I've gotten to meet him once.
And my interactions, and like I'm the biggest Lucas fan there is, and I'm almost, you know, an apologist at times. Definitely a defender because he deserves it, and I'll defend his legacy to the end because it's a very unique legacy in Hollywood.
It is.
I believe I've said this before on Rule of Two, but I believe he is one of only two active, truly independent filmmakers achieving the level that everybody wants to achieve while maintaining their independence. I believe it's him and Robert Rodriguez are really the only two that even in the conversation. So yes, it would be Lucas. My few times that I've actually gotten to meet him and try to cozy up to him have both gone very poorly, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
I think that he's very, rightfully so, probably very protective. Or not protective. He's just very...
He's cautious, maybe.
Cautious or maybe cynical.
I think he's a little cynical. I mean, we've talked about it on Rule of Two, but the idea of Lucas if he ended up doing episode 7, one of his ideas was going even deeper into the Force, going past the midichlorians and finding an even weirder whatever it is that controls the midichlorians, which he was going to call the wills, which is kind of going full circle to what he wrote.
Which to me, I mean, I got lost in thought there because I was like, again, this is a Rule of Two type of topic, but one of my biggest unfulfilled wishes is the ability to have seen what Lucas's vision was for episode 7, because he did start the episode 7 process did start with a screenplay that him and Michael Arndt wrote. Michael Arndt is still the top credited writer on The Force Awakens. And there was a whole script there. It was ready to go get shot. And it changed a lot, and I've always wondered what that script was.
When he came out and said the part about the midichlorians and the wills and that there was something else kind of controlling it, he then goes on to say, well, they would have hated that, but at least I would have told my story. And that, I think, goes to your point, on why you would cozy up to Lucas.
Okay, so first of all, not to get lost in Star Wars, but let me ask you a question. Do you think there's anything, because Michael Arndt is still the top credited writer, and like, I don't know if this is like guild stuff or if it's like he actually has a lot of his script left in there. Like, I have no idea about that. Is there anything in The Force Awakens that you think hints or has shadows or echoes of this sort of Will's storyline?
Ooh, boy.
Oh, maybe the flashback scene.
Maybe. I don't know. My gut instinct is saying no. Because there wasn't a lot of Force talk in it. It was a very loose kind of go from point A to point B to point C and then so on and so forth. And it's much more character based. I would say
it is very character based.
The introduction of Rey, the introduction of Finn, Poe, and then bring in some of the oldies but goodies.
We're going Rule of Two a little bit.
We're going Rule of Two a little bit. I'll bring us back around to the round table. I love that you said Lucas. I identify the most, I think, with Spielberg.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it, and it's because I think of E.T. And I mean, I'm more of a writer, and a producer. I don't think I ever want to direct. It's just not something that interests me. I like the producing and the collaboration. Like, I'd be a producer. I'd want to stand next to a director. You know what I mean? And find somebody like Spielberg. But there's a story of him coming up with E.T. while he was shooting Raiders, because Melissa Matheson was married to Harrison Ford at the time. And so he basically said, I have an idea. It's basically my sequel to Close Encounters, but not really a sequel, but it's a boy and his dog, and it's a boy and his alien. He came up with the idea. Melissa Matheson wrote it. That's me in a nutshell. Like, the concept or the storytelling trope of a boy and his dog is like my jam. I love that idea. You can put it in How to Train Your Dragon. You can put it in E.T. It looks like Bumblebee is going to incorporate this later on.
Looks cool.
Bumblebee looks great, but that's a boy and his dog story. A boy and her, a girl and her dog, or a robot. So I love that kind of storytelling, but it's Spielberg that I love because the thing that I still want to do, a goal that I've set out for myself is I want to see one of my scripts be a blockbuster. Like, I want to see it launch as franchise. That's what I love. And I look at Spielberg and I go, that's the guy that did it. That's my guy. But Lucas is like close second.
And like, look, this is another reason why I fell in love with Ready Player One so much. A lot of what you're saying, which is, when I was watching that movie, I felt that movie was specifically about us. And by us, I mean the kids that were growing up that you can say, oh, the people, you know how there's like millennials, oh, if you're born from this range to that range, you're a millennial, or here you're from Gen Z, or here you're from Gen X, whatever the hell. I think technically we're Gen X.
Yeah, I think we're Gen X.
But
I'll take it. I
think very specifically that movie is made for people born between 1972 and 1976. That 4-year span between 72 which is a huge year. There's like 72 is one of those amazing years that a bunch of things happened. A bunch of companies got launched. It was like one of these like instrumental years in the world. And then 76, obviously, like that bicentennial year. So
Sure.
everybody in that range that's now in their 40s, right? Because everybody in that range is in their 40s, all grew up with the 80s and with the 90s.
Yep.
Right? The 80s and the 90s were our formative years.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And this is when Spielberg was firing on all cylinders, reinventing what Hollywood was.
Oh,
right?
my God, yeah.
So, and if you think about it, since for quite some time, Spielberg's been out of the blockbuster game. Because AI was really kind of like his last big hurrah at it. Or his last huge blockbuster was Jurassic Park, which challenged.
Well, I would say, and a lot of people don't like saying it, but Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Okay, but that was a disaster.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But that was a blockbuster. That thing, we looked it up on Collider Live. That thing made over $700 million.
Yeah. But that was So for sure,
sure. But I kind of know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was a misfire on everybody's part. Lucas, Spielberg. As much as I defend the prequels, the thing about the prequels is like the more you watch them, the more you're like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen here. But wow, it's still beautiful. And like, wow, Ewan McGregor is really good. You got a lot of silly stuff, but wow, like there's some action in it. It's operatic, it's poetic. There's a lot of stuff going on in those prequels that I think the more you watch it, the more that you see in it.
Here's what I suggest. I did this. Have you done this? You might. Lucas did an interview. It might have been on the special features or something, but he's into visual storytelling. Yeah. Get rid of the dialogue. Just play the music. You'll get the story.
Yeah. That's what good directing is.
Yeah. That's all it. And that's, again, bringing it full circle to our conversation influences. Yeah. Where are you landing on the filmmaking spectrum? Are you more a writer, director? I see you as everything. To be honest with you, I see you've worked with you as a writer. I see your eye for directing, producer, obviously.
Yeah, look, as a craft, I love all of it. There's one thing that we haven't talked about, which I do think Lucas is not great at, because he's not great. A New Hope wasn't great at this.
Right, I know where you're going with this.
And all three prequels weren't great at this. Is his directing actors, okay, which is like, because when you talk about directing, and I've directed stuff before, some things better than others. Directing is really about, I would say, three things, okay? Number one is having an overall understanding of what the story is, and having a clear-cut vision of how you visually want to represent this story, right? Because shots and the way that you set up motivations of cameras. And look, you like Halloween. Like, I think Halloween, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm going to be blunt about it. I think that the acting in Halloween is some of the worst acting I've ever seen. Yeah. It's absolutely terrible.
A lot of people will go, especially around Halloween time, they'll go watch that movie for the first time going, what's everybody talking about? And be turned off completely because it doesn't match today's aesthetic.
But the directing of what they call the mise en scène. Right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like the actual shots and how they're edited together and how the shots create
this rhythm,
pacing and tension and fear and all these things are a masterclass in directing.
Do you know why? This is just speculation. I don't think I've seen Carpenter say otherwise. Is that he created the first slasher movie. Now, some people argue Black Christmas is the first slasher movie. It technically is.
Psycho is a contender for that as well.
Yes, I would say that Psycho, you're absolutely right, because without Halloween, without Psycho, there's no Halloween. Even The Knife is
of course.
But he, I will say, created the genre that has been copied ever since 1978, and that's Carpenter, because
Did it come out in 78?
It came out in 78. Yep. He did something that then everybody mimicked, and that was create characters where the audience goes, I don't like them, they're annoying, they're going to die. Right. You know what I mean? And that was what because the only person that was a good actor, I'm using air quotes, that really was down to earth, that didn't rub you the wrong way, was Jamie Lee Curtis. That's my opinion.
I agree. She was the closest thing, and she does give a good performance in that movie.
Yeah, and Donald Pleasance is being Donald Pleasance.
He's all right. I mean, all the kids around her are absolutely terrible.
And they die.
And they die.
and that's
that's a fair point.
I don't think it's conscious.
Yeah.
I think he was using, again, the reason I love these nuts and bolts things. When I look to these movies, I start with the script. I must have analyzed the Halloween script 100 times.
It's a good script.
Because he would use, and he wrote it with Deborah Hill, he wouldn't call him Michael in the stage directions. He would say the shape. And that really stuck with me because the filmmakers are already very aware of their theme, the mythology that they're creating, that this is a force of nature. Yeah. This is like the shark that just kills.
This is a total brain fart connection.
Sure.
But you know what movie does the shape really well that always stuck with me? This is a cheesy movie. You're going to laugh at me for this. But this character does, because even in this new Halloween, basically Michael's like this unstoppable force.
Right.
He's got the ultimate momentum, right? Like you can't, keeps walking to wherever he wants, which is, there's two movies that I think really did an incredible job about it. So if you look at It Follows, right?
Yeah.
It Follows, which I actually think has very nice stylistic directing in it.
It's great.
It's a good movie.
We just rewatched it, me and McCoogs.
It Follows is basically a high concept version of Halloween. We're saying this thing is going to always just keep walking towards you. It's
relentless, whatever.
You can't stop it.
You can't stop it.
But the one that I think did it really well, and this is where the brain fart came in, is do you remember a movie back in our days where we were growing up called Fright Night?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So are you kidding me? I love the original Fright Night. Chris Sarandon.
So Chris Sarandon, there was a scene where he's dressed like in a trench coat.
Yeah.
And he's just keeps walking, and the guy is just trying to dodge him.
Yeah,
and go into
and he's
court.
always there.
He's always there, just
because he's a vampire,
him.
man. He's got them powers.
Yeah, and that's something that you got to give John Carpenter a lot of credit for. So stylistically, as a director, I think he did a great job with the editing, with the mise en scène, right? Not to use fancy, stupid French words, but you're going to hear this a lot. If you study film, mise en scène is pretty much like what they call the art of intercutting pictures and sound to create story, right?
Yeah, and I always really mise en scène to me is like the conductor.
Yeah,
find that rhythm.
Yeah,
that's in edits.
Absolutely.
That's in music. Maybe a character says something here, and then bam, we cut to, and it's like you feel that rhythm.
And knowing how to play that rhythm, Frank Lucatardo and I are doing a feature-length documentary right now.
Yeah.
And I'm very, it's really cool. I'm very proud of it.
It's exciting to see, too.
Yeah,
I'm on the outside.
Yeah, it's an hour-and-a-half long documentary, and we've been working on it for about 6-7 months.
Yeah.
And, when Frank and I are in the room, we talk a lot about the pacing.
Yeah.
It's like you have to be conscious of the pacing, because if you spend too much time on X, then you're gonna make X not as exciting as X could be. So going from X to Y to Z, you gotta be conscious of pacing and the different stylistic elements you bring in, all to accomplish one thing, which is to not make people bored.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better.
I hate being bored in movies.
There's nothing worse when you sit in the theater and you're excited, especially for maybe a movie that you've been dying to see.
Yeah.
And then at 30 minutes in, you're, oh boy, if you look at your watch, the filmmaker lost you.
I got bored in a Solo.
I
know we can't talk about Star Wars, but I got bored in Solo.
I was going to say, the first movie that came to my mind was Solo, because I think we've talked about it, but our thoughts on Solo from Rule of Two, but
anyway,
this is really fascinating.
One question for you, really quick.
Yeah, please.
So from you mentioned the writing and the producing, two things that I've seen you do well, without a doubt. You talk about directing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the mise en scène part that you're less interested in, or is it the working with actors part that you're less interested in?
No,
because these are two slightly separate things, and a lot of times when you see brother directors or team directors, one person will deal more with the mise en scène stuff, like the camera placement, the camera moves, and stuff like that. The other person will deal more with the actors.
It's more the mise en scène. I think because, I did direct, and this is back in the day, and people know me here. This is a personal podcast as well. They know I'm divorced. They know that it ended not well, and but I directed my ex in a short, and working with actors is great. It's fine. I speak their language. I was an actor at one point. It's really, and I think I have it, but I think my talent lies more in the writing. I can show you on the page. When I'm setting up shots, I'm like maybe it's something I just need to keep working at.
Yeah.
And you've seen a lot of writers become directors. Seen a lot of writers say, "I'm never going to direct. I love writing."
A lot of people, like even Woody Allen back in the early days, would not direct the mise en scène element of it. He had an editor that he worked with in almost every single movie, and he worked. He was very, very, very smart. Another thing that he took from Ingmar Bergman. Ingmar Bergman used to work with the best cinematographers out there.
Oh yeah, that's so important.
So Sven Nykvist and all these masters. And then Woody Allen was like, "Oh, I got to make Annie Hall. Oh, I got money to make it. Great. Now I actually have money. Who should I hire? Oh man, The Godfather looks great, right? The Godfather's a great looking movie, right?
Gorgeous.
So hey, can you get Gordon Willis on the phone? It's like yeah. Oh, Woody, yeah, you're gonna have Diane Keaton and you want Gordon Willis?
Yeah,
I'll take Gordon Willis. Gordon Willis comes on and does Annie Hall,
and it's beautiful.
And all he has to worry about is an incredible script and working with actors. And, I'm sure Gordon Willis and him would have discussions, but he could trust Gordon Willis to make sure that it was photographed absolutely gorgeous, that you had a lot of coverage. Because when you're directing,
yes,
you got to have coverage.
You got to have a shit ton of coverage.
Yeah, and you got to know strategically what to cover so that to make your editor's job as easy as possible. Because your editor then, editing, I think editing is the most underappreciated part of filmmaking.
Agreed.
And people
it can
don't
make
understand.
Or break.
It's not that it can, it's not that it can make or break. It's that ultimately the editor of the movie, depending on how close the director is working with them, is the art form.
Yeah.
The editing is the art form. The acting is just a piece of it. It's just like a color in it. The acting maybe is a little bit more than a color. Maybe the acting is more like the size of the canvas, or it's a little bit more fundamental.
Sure,
but,
I know kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's all done in the editing. Everything is done in the editing.
Yes,
in the post, in the sound design.
Well, the editing is where the story really starts to coalesce, and really start to see it.
Yeah,
and how they put it together. As again, I go to Vernon Fields, who is able to cut around no shark.
Yeah. We just hired a new producer for Collider Studios. Her name is Tiffany, and she told me the greatest thing. I hadn't heard this before because we're planning this docu-series that we're shooting down in the Everglades about snakes and stuff like that, and it's actually really exciting. And
I know, I'm excited for this.
And she was like, one of her favorite little things that she's heard is how people say fix it in post.
Yeah,
she's like, let's fix it in prep.
That's great.
I absolutely love that.
That's great. That's where you got to start too. That's very smart of her because in prep you got to be ready. I mean, this is I learned this the hard way when I made my movie. The director we had, God love him, he's fucking genius. He's a fucking genius of a guy. But we were so underprepared because he kind of looked at it as a very kind of creative, collaborative.
Expressive.
Not a lot of planning, so we didn't. We couldn't fix it in post.
Hitchcock would shoot him.
Yes,
Hitchcock planned everything.
Yes, so we would spend time, and this is just his working. This is just the way he works. No right, no wrong. But for an independent, small, very small budget, we needed that shit planned before we walked on a set because he would plan it when he walked on a set instead of the other way around.
Thinking that somehow that was part of the art form, or like jazz or something.
Yeah, and he's a musician, and he would like to jam. So he was wanting to jam, but we're like, we have 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And we have to shoot this. So it was
the jamming happens on the script.
The jamming happens on the script, which we jammed because I worked with him quite a bit on that. But then, you got to have those storyboards. You got to have, whether it's storyboards or you have it on your phone. Maybe it's pictures.
Yeah. We had great storyboards for the Frogman. Remember, we storyboarded the shit out of that.
Yeah,
thing.
we did. We had that thing ready.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do it.
Maybe we'll do it one of these days.
But I will wrap it up there on a nice little button on the maybe one day we'll do this. This has been a great talk.
How long did we go?
We went an hour and 15 minutes, which I can't believe. That flew by for me.
Yeah, it was good. It was fun, man. It was fun talking with you about filmmaking, something we both love. That's not only Star Wars, you know?
Exactly. That's why I wanted to do this, why I wanted to get you on here, because I think, and I'm thinking about the title for this thing, and it's like Hitchcock, Kurosawa, Spielberg, De Palma, Coppola, our film influences.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that. It's just going deep. We could go another hour, I'm sure.
Yeah, they just turned the red light on us.
Did they really? They just turned the red light on us. So we got to wrap it up there, and that will do it. That's a hell of an episode. That was episode 22 on the Reilly Roundtable. Mark Fernandez joining me. I know his Twitter. It's at Mark Fernandez on Twitter. Please also tune in to Rule of Two, which drops every Wednesday on the Collider Jedi Council Podcast One feed. But anything you want to say on the way out, Mr. Fernandez? Thank you for joining me.
It was a pleasure to do it. Maybe we should talk movies again one day.
Absolutely. I'll have you back on. And again, you can find me, folks, at Reilly Round on Twitter and Instagram. It's the Reilly Roundtable. It's on One with Christian Harloff Podcast One feed. Drops every Thursday. That's right, every Thursday. And this is also up on the Collider Podcast YouTube channel. Drop in some comments. Like and share this video. Like and share this podcast. Give us some ratings. Give us some comments. It's always appreciative. And so for Reilly and Fernandez, see you next week. Bye-bye now.